Okay, today is Thursday, October 2nd, 2025, and I'm going to run through the study guide on the Middle English period. This is for all of my British Lit students. I will get this posted as soon as I'm done. It will have the answers to the study guide, as well as some specifics that you need to study for your test, which is next Wednesday. We will most certainly, all of us, watch this together in class on Monday of next week. And then Tuesday, I will be off campus with the seniors to attend ULM's college fair. And so we will come back and take this test on Wednesday. All of you should have this. Probably for the most part, it is blank. Unless you have taken some initiative and gone through the notes and filled it out yourself, which is wonderful. If you have, I have the notes open in front of me, and we are going to run through this as quickly as I possibly can, hopefully with no interruptions. So, as I believe I've told all of you, we're going to test on the Middle English period twice. The first test will come before fall break, and the second test after fall break. The first test is a history and vocabulary test. So the third page of your study guide is the vocabulary. They are already defined for you. So what we are interested in right now are the blanks on pages 1 and 2. So it'll be vocabulary, and it will be just, there's a lot of historical things that are happening during this time period. Your second test is going to cover Middle English authors. And primarily that's going to be Geoffrey Chaucer and his major work, The Canterbury Tales. But we will also discuss some men who were working at this time to translate the Bible. And the translation of Scripture is actually a major way that we have always been able to trace the evolution of the English language. So, for next week, you need to worry about the history and the vocabulary portion, and that is what this set of notes deals with. So we are picking up where we left off chronologically with the Old English period. The Old English period is very much defined by the language spoken in Britain at that time, which was Old English, which was strictly a Germanic language, as you know now, brought by the Anglo-Saxons. What is going to happen in 1066 is the Battle of Hastings, which was won by a man named William of Normandy, who will later be known to history as William the Conqueror, because he wins the Battle of Hastings and he becomes the King of England. He is a French-speaking man. His soldiers who come with him to conquer England are French-speaking. We still usually say French-Latin at this point, because French is one of the direct derivatives of the Latin language that was spoken by the Romans, the Roman Empire, who ruled the world for many years. And certainly one of the places that they ruled was France, and they made the French people speak Latin. And so we say French. It would not mirror the French of today. It was heavily influenced by the Latin language. So if you hear it as French-Latin, that is why. Number one on your study guide, I've already answered a couple of these. Number one is Edward the Confessor. And that is in your notes. I'm looking at the notes right now. On that first slide that says Battle of Hastings and then 1066 in parentheses at the top, William of Normandy, later known as William the Conqueror, felt he had a right to the English throne. Why? And that's what we're about to talk about. England at one point had a king named Edward the Confessor, and he had no children. And when a king has no children, it's a problem, because succession is not obvious, and succession just means who is in line for the throne next. So succession struggles were very common in England. This is one of the most consequential, probably, because of the way that all this falls out. So number one is Edward the Confessor. When he's alive, he's the King of England. He names William of Normandy as his successor. Number two, I have already answered. William of Normandy is also known as William the Conqueror. Number three, I have already answered. The Battle of Hastings was fought in the year 1066. We kind of round this. Historians round it to about 1100, and so that's why the Middle English period is dated around 1100 until the year 1485. So chronologically on the timeline, that's where we are right now. All of the things that we're going to discuss unfolded during those years. Number 4 on your study guide reads, whom did William of Normandy successfully defeat in order to secure the English crown for himself? That is a man named Harold Godwin. Harold felt that he had a right to the throne because Edward the Confessor was his brother-in-law. And so while Edward the Confessor was still alive and on the throne, Harold kind of went along with things and pretended, like everything was fine and he would be totally cool with William of Normandy becoming the next king. But when Edward died, he challenged William for the throne. And that challenge was decided at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. Harold is unsuccessful, and so William of Normandy becomes the King of England. This one battle was linguistically extremely significant. And I think we've talked already pretty exhaustively about why that is. It's one of the things that Dr. Engel mentioned in his lecture. But it was also consequential in other ways. One of those, and this is the answer to number 5. This is in your notes, the slide at the top that says French claim. Number 5 says, in addition to King of England, what title did William of Normandy's descendants claim? And the answer to that is Duke of Normandy. So William has a lot of French ties, obviously. Like, he's from France, and he held some territory in France before he became the King of England. So he never lets go of that title. And this is going to be consequential down the line because his descendants, his sons, are now going to become the next kings of England. They never relinquish that title either, which gives them a foothold in France. So one of the descendants of William of Normandy is named Henry. Henry is a Duke of Normandy, and in 1152, this is the answer to number 6, he is going to marry a woman named Eleanor of Aquitaine. Eleanor, and this is spelled in your notes, but this one's kind of tricky. I will spell this one for you. Eleanor, of course, is Eleanor of Aquitaine, which is, as you might guess, is a region in France. She's very, very French. Is spelled Aquitaine. So Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry get married in 1152. He's technically not Henry II at this point because he has not become the King of England yet. That's when you get your Roman numerals. He will become the King of England 2 years later in 1154. And so now he is a Duke of Normandy because his father was William of Normandy. Well, I have to take that back. Not his father. One of his ancestors was William of Normandy. And he is now the King of England. He has married a woman named Eleanor of Aquitaine, who was a member of the French royal family. So what their marriage is going to fuel, and this is the answer to number 7, is what is known in history as the 100 Years' War. And this is basically England and France going at it and at it and at it over and over again for really over 100 years. Over claims to the various thrones. And this all stems from William of Normandy winning the Battle of Hastings, becoming the King of England, never giving up his title of Duke of Normandy. And now his ancestor, one of his ancestors, marries a member of the French royal family. And so they feel like they have a very strong claim to both nations. So number 7 is the 100 Years' War. I'm just going to read you this slide on the French claim because it's kind of complicated. It says in 1152, Eleanor of Aquitaine, who had recently annulled her marriage to the King of France, married Henry, who at the time was a Duke of Normandy. Henry was the heir to the English throne. He would eventually become Henry II. 2 years after they get married, he becomes the King of England. The marriage of Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine gave all future English kings a claim to the French throne. And this claim is what fuels the 100 Years' War. It is a series of English military campaigns into France attempting to take their throne. It continues in part because Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II have 8 children. 5 of the 8 children are male, and 3 of those males are going to become kings of England. So a hugely significant marriage. Number 8 is a little shift in topic. What document did King John sign in 1215? The answer to that is the Magna Carta. This is obviously discussed in the slide, which at the top says Magna Carta and then 1215. This was a charter agreed to by King John of England in June of 1215. It was consequential for them at the time, and it was consequential for us. It's one of the documents that influenced our founding fathers in America. So to show you the influence that the Latin language continued to have, Magna Carta is short for Magna Carta Libertatum, which is medieval Latin for the Great Charter of the Liberties. In your textbook, this is discussed on page 7 under the section titled Seeds of Democracy. So England is like, they're not a democracy yet. And they very much still have a king who is very, very powerful. These are the first very, very baby steps toward giving the people some rights because they previously really had none. It specified rights for commoners, such as a trial by jury, the right to have a judge regularly visit all parts of the realm, and typically the judge would have to travel because, travel was very difficult back then for a lot of reasons and was largely impossible for the poorer people. So if you could not travel to London for a trial, then a judge would come to you. I will tell you there is a question on your test. Let me try to find it. And it reads something like, the Magna Carta granted English citizens all of the following except, and here's your options. A right to a trial by jury. Yes, it did grant them that. I just told you that. A right to a trial presided over by a judge. Yes, it grants them that. What it did not grant them, and what you would answer on this question, is the right to own land. Private property was still very much a foreign concept at this time. The king owned all the land, and he would, lease it out. I guess that's the term we would use for that, to certain of his noblemen, but certainly not everybody had the right to own private property. And at least in theory, like on paper, officially, it all belonged to the king. Okay. Number 9 on your study guide says the dukedoms of Lancaster and York argued over the English throne for blank years in what is known in history as the War of the Roses. And this is discussed, obviously, on a couple of slides. The first one is titled The War of the Roses, and then it says 1455 to 1485. So the War of the Roses was a 30-year conflict over succession to the English throne. And it was a conflict between two families who both felt that they had a right to the English throne, the Lancasters and the Yorks. The final battle of the War of the Roses was fought in 1485. And so number 9, if you haven't already figured it out, would read, the dukedoms of Lancaster and York argued over the English throne for 30 years in what is known in history as the War of the Roses. And I'll explain where they get the roses from in a minute. It is decided at the Battle of Bosworth. Like the War of the Roses ends. It lasts for 30 years. There's finally a decisive battle, and we know it in history as the Battle of Bosworth, and that was fought in 1485. Number 10 asks you who defeated whom at the Battle of Bosworth, and the answer to that is Henry Tudor, Tudor, defeated Richard III. And so number 11, as you might guess, since Henry Tudor is successful, he is the first Tudor monarch. So the answer to 11 is Henry VII. That means he was the 7th man named Henry to be a king of England. And so the 7 in Roman numerals is VII. So that is number 11. Number 12, I've sort of already answered. That is 1485. So he wins the Battle of Bosworth. It ends the War of the Roses. There's finally, like, decisively a king of England. And this is 1485. This is what ends. This is officially ends, like, the Dark Ages, the Middle English period. All of this is over by 1485. So, I told you that I would tell you a little bit more about, like, why they called it the War of the Roses. And that is because both of these families involved in the 30-year back and forth over the throne, they had as their, like, family crest or their insignia a rose. And one of them was white and one of them was red. And so, sort of as a act of goodwill, I guess, if you want to think of it that way, when Henry Tudor wins in 1485 the Battle of Bosworth and he becomes the King of England, he superimposes, like, one of the roses over the other. Probably like the white one over the red one. That is what is known as the Tudor rose, and it then becomes the family crest or insignia of the Tudors. But that's where we get War of the Roses. The War of the Roses is what influenced, it's sort of like the loose source material for George R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones, which is a book series, and then it was also made into a TV show, which I never watched. But that is where all that comes from. So, let me see here. These are the basic succession issues. There's a few questions on here about what we might term like social and economic conditions in England at this time. Number 13, which is the next question on your study guide, asks you, how did the bubonic plague affect England's economy? And the short answer to that, what I have written down, is it caused a labor shortage. The bubonic plague is also known sometimes as the Black Death. It periodically would rear its head, like they would have periodic outbreaks all during the Dark Ages. From 1348 to 1349, which was one of the first major outbreaks, it destroyed a third of England's population. Like, it killed a lot of people. And that is primarily because the death rate was around 90%. Like, if you contracted it, you were probably going to die, no matter how young or old or healthy or not you were before you contracted it. It was called the Black Death because if you were infected, your lymph nodes, like your lymphatic system, is what tries to flush germs and problematic things out of your body, and the lymph nodes of those who were infected would, like, turn black. So that's where that unofficial name, the Black Death, came from. It caused a labor shortage. I mean, obviously, because when that many people die at once, you just don't have enough people. But particularly the people who were affected most were the poor, like the working class, because it was spread, they finally figured out, from rats to humans via flea bites. And so if you are a poor person at this time, you know, hygiene was not great really for anybody, but poorer people sometimes would be sleeping in very close quarters with animals. And so certainly without them even knowing initially, like, how is this spreading, but even once you figure it out, like, you could not necessarily avoid the fleas and the flea bites, and that is how it was spreading to people. They will deal with the bubonic plague off and on until the year 1666. And we'll talk about this later when we get to this on the timeline chronologically, but in 1666 there is a major fire in London, and you know, fire, as we discussed with Lord of the Flies, serves many purposes. And so probably in addition to, like, better hygiene and a better understanding of what was fueling the disease, the spread of the disease, the fire probably acted as like a sterilization agent as well. So that is the bubonic plague. It caused a labor shortage. And anytime there's a labor shortage, it's going to potentially cause like a disruption and just the current setup of things, because when you have very few people who can do, the grunt work, those who are still around feel like, hey, maybe we have some bargaining power. So I'm looking at the slide right now at the top that's titled Labor Conditions. It says the bubonic plague killed so many people, there was a resulting labor shortage. Since 1066, and that's when the Battle of Hastings was fought. And so this is another way that William of Normandy, or William the Conqueror, changed England, is he instituted what is known as the feudal system. Number 14 asks you to define the feudal system. And I have written down, and I think this is word for word in your notes, a political arrangement based on a scale of privileges and responsibilities. So that's a political arrangement based on a scale of privileges and responsibilities that consisted of the three estates: the clergy, the knights and nobles, and then the peasants. And this is all spelled out in your notes. So as I mentioned when we talked about the Magna Carta, which did not grant peasants the right to own their own land, the king owned all the land. He would lease it to certain nobles, and then they could lease it to other nobles. And so what that meant was they could use it as they pleased. They did not officially own it. And in turn, they would let people work their land, and they would offer those people like protection, probably somewhere to live. If they were growing crops, then the people who were working the land could feed their family with the crops, but they weren't necessarily like paid wages. And so that is one of the reasons why there was really no upward mobility. You can't like save money and become wealthy if you're not being paid with money. If your payment is essentially, you can live on my land and I will protect you and, make sure your family is fed, and that's your wages. So that's kind of the feudal system in a nutshell. In your notes, there's a little bit more information about the manor, which was essentially like a self-sufficient estate. Because at this time, of course, you're not like running to town for everything that you need. But between between feudalism and then the manor, it was a very rigid class system. There was no, you basically were going to remain in the station into which you were born. And England operated this way for many, many years. So the labor shortage that resulted from the plague is obviously going to threaten feudalism in some ways. There was a very brief peasants' revolt. Nothing really consequential came of it at the time, but it was sort of like a foreshadowing of the fact that things will eventually change. It's just going to take a long time, which is usually the case. The last little bit on your study guide, number 15, alludes to what is going on religiously. So the answer to number 15, which reads, papal, and I've told you papal always just means the Pope. Papal expeditions to the Holy Lands are historically known as the Crusades. And so I'm looking right now at the slide that says at the top, religion during the Middle English period. We are under Roman Catholic rule. Because if you remember from your first test, during the Old English period, all of the English clergy got together at one point and they said, hey, we have to make a decision. We're either going to be a Roman Catholic or an Irish Catholic nation. And they decided in the favor of Roman Catholicism. And so that is where we are still right now. The Pope is still very much involved in all things going on in England. From around 1095 until around 1291, the Pope sent expeditions to the Holy Land, which is what we now call the Middle East, in an attempt to capture territory that was held by Muslims then, and most of it is still held by Muslims now, because it's land that Christians consider to be sacred. All of these expeditions are known in total as the Crusades. and we're really not here to study all the details of the Crusades. I have a lot of opinions about them. I think some of those involved had very genuine motives, but some of them kind of got out of control. I think that the Catholic Church obviously thought that recapturing what they deemed to be the Holy Lands was a wonderful and a worthy goal. But some of those involved in the Crusades were motivated by economic, political greed, things along those lines. And they did eventually target other Christians, people who called themselves Christians and considered themselves to be Christians, but they were not Roman Catholic. So things did get a little bit out of control there. This is sort of leading into our next test. In addition to Geoffrey Chaucer, we're going to talk about a man named John Wycliffe. And in part because of the Crusades and what he saw happening there, I don't know if his name is pronounced Wycliffe or Wycliffe, because I've heard it both ways. But he started to speak out against the very powerful Roman Catholic Church. At the end of this set of notes, there is a link to a set of notes on him. That's going to be part of your next test. So we're not worried about him right now, but his criticism of the church was very much tied to, in part, what he saw happening under the authority of the Pope and the Roman Catholic Church during the time of the Crusades. Now, there's one sort of review question at the end of your study guide, and so you should already know all of these answers. Number 16, it's really to highlight for you the fact that this time period, the Middle English time period, begins with a very significant battle, and then it ends with another battle. And so 16 should read, the Battle of Hastings, fought in the year 1066, can be said to mark the beginning of the Middle English period, while the Battle of Bosworth, fought in the year 1485, can be said to mark the end of the Middle English period. So obviously there will be some dates on this test. You will need to know when the Battle of Hastings was fought. I want you to understand that the Dark Ages, which encompasses Old English and Middle English, is said to have started around 450, kind of predating the official fall of the Roman Empire by a few years. So from 450 until 1485, this is the Dark Ages. We've studied it in two segments, Old English and Middle English, but all of it together is considered the Dark Ages. So Middle English period, which is what this test is covering, can be said to have run from around 1100 until the year 1485. You need to know that Edward the Confessor was the childless king of England who named William the Conqueror as his successor to the English throne. William the Conqueror's rival for the English throne was Harold Godwin, the brother-in-law of Edward the Confessor, who thought that he should be the next king of England. William the Conqueror maintained his title Duke of Normandy while he was king of England. You need to know that Normandy is located in France. That is a question on your test, and I always have a handful of people who miss it. You need to know that Henry II married Eleanor of Aquitaine, who was French royalty, and these are some of the descendants of William of Normandy who held on to that title, Duke of Normandy, which is what fueled the 100 Years' War. English attempts to claim the throne of France. That is the 100 Years' War. The Magna Carta, I've already mentioned this question, granted all English citizens all of the following except, and your answer there is the right to own land. It did not give them that right. The battle that ended the War of the Roses was the Battle of Bosworth, fought in 1485. The primary figures in the final battle of the War of the Roses were Richard III and Henry Tudor. Henry Tudor will be victorious. He will become the King of England in 1485. He is the first Tudor monarch, and we know him in history as Henry VII. The War of the Roses took place over a 30-year span from 1455 until 1485. Let me see what else here, because we are pushing 30 minutes on this video. I asked you on here what I told you earlier in the video. The Magna Carta Libertatum means the Great Charter of the Liberties in what language? And the answer to that is Latin. During the Middle English period, the Pope commissioned expeditions, the stated goal of which was to recapture Holy Lands that were under Muslim control. These campaigns are collectively known as the Crusades. You need to know that the bubonic plague caused a labor shortage in England during the Middle English period. All right, I'm going to stop this now. I will get this loaded for all of you. You can watch it in your own time, but I will force you to watch it in class on Monday, and make sure you have all these answers and get you caught up before we take this test next Wednesday. Bye, guys.